Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 155. I am your one and only host, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the last technical podcast of November 2020. And I say technical because this podcast, I believe, is going up on the 30th of November. So by the time a lot of you have heard this podcast, it will pretty much be December, meaning that we are pretty much at the final stretch, the final stretch of 2020. And thank goodness, because I'm pretty sure for anyone who has lived through 2020, they're going to be pretty ecstatic to see the end of this awful year. But yeah, and also to put things into perspective as well, this is one of the last, if not I think the second to last normal podcast before the end of the year podcast. So yeah, things are going to be very interesting over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, we've got Christmas and school term ending and all that good stuff. But in terms of things I've been doing over the last few weeks, it's honestly been quite interesting as it is coming up to the end of the year and we are getting ready to do the end of the year podcast. I've mainly just been catching up on things that I actually want to talk about on said podcast. So I'm kind of in the midst of about 2 to 3 shows and a few other things. So there isn't too much I can talk about for the most part. The only thing that I will say that I have been watching, because I've watched so much of it but not a complete series or season, is the British comedy / game show Taskmaster, which recently has been, or currently is airing its 10th season. If you've never watched or heard of Taskmaster, you may be, outside of England. The basic premise is it takes 5 comedians, or I think more generalized, funny people, and essentially gives them very specific or random or confusing tasks for them to complete for the amusement and the judging of the Taskmaster himself, being Greg Davies, as well as his assistant being Alex Horn. And essentially what this show strives and does so perfectly is it isn't just a show based or, just banking on funny people make show funny. It is essentially everything that makes the show funny. The random and crazy bizarre situations that these comedians have to do in terms of the task, the banter between watching what they've just done and kind of picking it apart and commentating on it, and as well as just other really creative and interesting things. The chemistry with everyone just works pretty much. And it's a really, really funny series. I would highly recommend watching. I don't want to spoil the 10th season because it is very, very new. And obviously I don't want to be like spoiling the certain tasks they do or how exactly the series is panning out. But I do love how it constantly stays fresh, because it sounds like a very simple premise. Comedians do tasks for points, but they keep it very fresh, in which that the beginning of each episode, they have the first task is to bring in something to do with a theme. And that theme could be anything from, the fluffiest thing to something just completely random, like, the thing that you don't like the most or something like that. I'm trying not to spoil things that have been the theme in past episodes. And whoever brings in the best thing that fits into that theme gets 5 points right off the bat, and then it goes 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, which is an interesting strategy, because you could bring in the best thing, get 5 points, and end up winning it, because if you do win said episode, you get all 5 of the prizes that everyone brought in. So it's quite interesting. And even the show ends with them doing a live task there in the studio. So even if you are not necessarily a fan of people just reacting to things that you see or watched on the screen, at least there's like a really good or an extra live element in terms of the task. So you get that raw, real like reaction that it doesn't have so much like editing compared to the montages of them doing the tasks they did, however long ago. And this series is interesting because it is conforming to COVID-19 social distancing. So it is a bit odd to see, all the guests and the presenters so far apart, as well as there being no audience who are watching it in another room. But so far, I'm really enjoying it. It's about 6 out of 10 episodes in. And yeah, it's definitely one of the stronger things I've watched this year. But in terms of other things I have done over the last 2 weeks, it's honestly just been organizing for the most part. And I'm sure some of you are probably, sick of me saying that, oh, Raccoon, you're always organizing. Well, that's because you need to be organized in life. But essentially a couple of very interesting and important things that popped up in my life. So I'm basically in organizing and preparation mode for next year. I can't say why, but one of the main things I've been doing is getting the end of the year podcast, which should be podcast 157, ready and organized. So that's been one thing. And also what hasn't helped is the fact that my internet over the last 2 days has just been awful. Pretty awful to the point where it's been kind of hard, even just now, to actually rewatch and read everything just to make sure it's a little fresher in my head, because the internet is just so slow. I can't even open up a web page or anything that's in the download link in the description. Haven't been able to watch most of it. And because of that, I will say if I do sound a bit different at points, because I'm going to possibly read off a few quotes, that's because I've had to take screenshots, because, you'll see what I mean in terms of what I might quote or reference. But that's pretty much been me this last 2 weeks. And I guess we're going to move straight on into the podcast. And we've got some fairly unfortunate news, which kind of shakes things up in terms of the grand scape of everyone's favorite video sharing platform, and that's YouTube. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about YouTube's new update and terms of services that they released as of the 19th of November, which had a lot of people, understandably, very annoyed, myself included. And I think this is another thing that doesn't really, for once, it doesn't really affect the more higher YouTubers, the YouTubers that get millions of views, millions of subscribers, that kind of stuff. It kind of affects everyone else out of that, I guess, 1% for the most part. And it is quite unfortunate for the most part. So essentially what YouTube is rolling out is, and I guess I'll read the quote just so you guys have a little bit more context, and so you have that general reference. But the main thing that has been bothering people is the fact that they are talking about changes to the YouTube Partner Program, or the YPP. So for anyone who doesn't know, at any point, if you are eligible, which is a point I'll come back to, you can essentially partner with YouTube in order to have your videos monetized, as in ads will run on them, and you will make said money off the views and likes and all that stuff that your video makes if you're eligible. And what they've decided to do now is essentially decide that if you're not part of the YouTube Partner Program, but let's say you have a popular video, YouTube will make money off that, not you. So I guess I'll read the quote real quick. So just give me a brief second while I get the quote ready. So I will sound a bit different just for a second, but the quote as it reads regarding, for channels not yet in the YouTube Partner Program, we added this new section to let you know that starting today, which I would imagine being November 19th, starting today, we'll begin slowly rolling out ads on a limited number of videos from channels not in the YPP, that's YouTube Partner Program. This means as a creator that it's not, This means as a creator that's not in the YPP, you may see ads on some of your videos. Since you're not currently in the YPP, you won't receive a share of the revenue from these ads, though you'll still have the opportunity to apply for the YPP, as you normally would once you meet the eligible requirements. You can always check your progress towards eligibility on the monetization tab on YouTube Studio. Sorry for butchering that quote, but yeah, so simply put, if you so happen to have a very popular, let's say, video you've made, just something you've made randomly and it gets pretty popular, or let's say, you don't want to make money off YouTube, you just like making fun meme videos or something like that. If that video is deemed popular enough, YouTube will throw ads on that video, and they alone will make money off of it, which is pretty awful. It's really scummy that they're doing this, because the amount of people who have just uploaded this one video that could have got hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of views, and they don't care about YouTube, and it is, let's say, something they've originally created. Like, let's say they did a joke video, like a meme or a mashup video, or some kind of video essay, something along those lines, something that's just generally considered funny or has a lot of replay value, quotable, and that kind of stuff. Essentially, YouTube will only be making money off that. Now, this is a big problem, because This once again destroys the whole point of YouTube, in that you're most likely going to see a lot of people in response to this just straight up taking down their videos because they've done something creative or interesting, and YouTube has decided, well, we're going to make money off that and not you. And I know what some people may be thinking, oh, why don't you just apply for the YouTubers Partner Program? The problem is the eligibility to do such is very strict. You need a certain amount of views and a certain amount of subscribers, something that not everyone has. So, for example, I don't have a lot of subscribers on this current channel, being the Angry Raccoon 1. I'm not eligible to make money off said podcast, even if I wanted to. If in the future one of these podcasts gets really popular and it gets 1,000 views, or one of the older videos in the past gets 1,000 views and it gets, like, I don't know, 100 views a day or something like that, I will never be able to make money off that video. Even if YouTube's only making £1 off of it, I won't be able to make money off that because my subscriber count is low and no one is watching my channel and the videos enough for me to become a partner. So they're basically screwed over like millions of people, potentially, because I know at the end of the day, if my video that I made when I went to Japan, that is the most popular video I ever made, so in theory that could get monetized and I could see no money off of that. The idea that YouTube is potentially going to make money off a video that cost me a lot of money to technically make, because obviously I needed money to fly out there, I needed money for equipment, obviously a lot of time went into editing it, that's an absolute piss take. And I'm in a very odd position where I'm not sure if I should take it down, because I just don't like the idea of someone else making money off my work. It's understandable, and it's just a bit ridiculous. Honestly, YouTube is very starved and very desperate. YouTube, or I should say more, Google doesn't make any money off YouTube, pretty much. They don't, because they're too busy throwing all this kind of stuff. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous at the same time. I'm not sure if anyone has noticed that the ads, if you don't use ad blocker, are getting a bit ridiculous. Usually it was about 5 seconds before you are able to skip an ad, but now they've risen it up to about 6 to 7 seconds. They're playing like 2 ads that you have to skip now, or 2 ads that you have to watch now. It's honestly getting a bit ridiculous now. Like, I never really used ad blocker, only because the 20 people that I watch on YouTube, they deserve money. I would say that much. They deserve to be paid, and they deserve to have ads on their videos, and they deserve to make money and all that kind of stuff. But this, I think, is just absolute garbage. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have always been considering taking down all the videos and starting my own website anyway. So that might happen in the future, because, you know, YouTube is just not the one right now. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, there's no alternatives, you know, open up your own website. There are plenty of other websites that do the same thing as YouTube. You know, it's just people just don't go there. It's just absolutely awful. And I'm just really shocked that YouTube would do this. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I'm still shocked. And it's just a bit ridiculous. And it's a massive shame. All I'm going to say for now in terms of the situation is, yeah, podcast 160 is going to be very interesting. But let's move on to our next topic. Another thing that is just kind of baffling and just kind of a bit douchey at the end of the day, and that is the whole situation regarding a Super Smash Bros. Tournament that essentially received a cease and desist from Nintendo because they decided, or were somewhat forced, to use a third-party online mod in order for their tournament to happen. So, for those of you who don't know, Super Smash Bros. Melee is not an online game. You cannot play with other people around the world with that game. And because the tournament that usually happens just simply can't and shouldn't happen because of COVID-19 right now, they decided to use said third-party mod in order for competitors to compete against each other. Nintendo got whiff of this and essentially shut it down because, well, I don't really know why, because Nintendo has a very bad history or reputation, really, with just not letting anyone enjoy their games in any kind of sense. Yet Nintendo themselves won't do anything with said games at all. It's quite bad because Nintendo is known for sending out a lot of cease and desist to people who are archiving their games or doing mods or anything creative or anything that in fairness, comes under video game preservation. A lot of Nintendo's games are still locked behind their NES and SNES cartridges. They haven't ported or made download links. They haven't ported or made downloads on their eShop for most of their games. They're working at too slow of a pace. Other studios have got all their games digitally or re-released them physically. Nintendo needs to catch up. And, just doing the All-Stars collection recently on Switch was not good enough, especially given the fact that that thing is running on an emulator, the same kind of emulator that they would, take down. So this is a very sticky situation because obviously the fans of Super Smash Bros. Are obviously pretty livid at this because it is just a bit ridiculous. I mean, the fandom is pretty toxic as it is already, but this has honestly made it worse because obviously they say, Melee's the best game, I'm sure Nintendo would disagree. I'm sure Nintendo would much rather them be playing Ultimate, which was going to be at the tournament. But it's just a bit ridiculous, and it just feels like they're just being old people once again. It's just stupid. I think they just honestly freaked out at this, and I got a really annoying quote, which doesn't even explain anything, and is still just a petty way to explain why they sent the tournament people, which I can't remember their name right now, but it is in the article that I have linked in the description, the download link. They sent them the cease and desist, and I think the quote goes as follows. And I'm going to sound strange again because I have to look at the quote. And essentially, their very cryptic quote was, they refused, leaving Nintendo no choice but to step in and protect its intellectual properties and brands. At the same time, I get it. It is their property. The the tournament providers do not own the game. I get that. I understand. And if someone is taking your game incorrectly, yeah, stop them by any means. But at the end of the day, Nintendo doesn't seem to understand free advertising because it's only going to promote your game at the end of the day. And here's the thing, I don't understand if Nintendo's going to go against this kind of logic of, we've got to protect our brand. Why aren't they taking down every Nintendo video on Melee right now? Because a lot of people, there's videos of people using that same third-party online mod on YouTube. There are people playing their games. There are people who have emulated their games and playing it. You can find videos of people playing, Mother 3 on the PC, I guarantee you. Why Nintendo isn't taking them down, I do not understand. I just think they are just basically bullying people at this point, which is a massive shame because if the studio themselves decide not to do a Smash Bros. Tournament again, fine, let that game die. If that's how Nintendo wants to play, two can play at that game. It's a real shame, and it doesn't bode well, especially when Nintendo has had a pretty good kind of comeback in terms of the success of the Switch and other things they've done. It's a big shame, and it's just a bit disheartening because Nintendo doesn't really have the right to do that, because at the end of the day it also comes down to the whole idea of Nintendo could very easily just say, you're not allowed to play Melee now, which it's getting close to that because they pretty much are saying that you're not allowed to play Melee unless it's a copy on the GameCube. All they need to do really is just release a version of it online, and then the problem's solved. It's not as if it's not going to sell money. So that was stupid, and Nintendo is just being stupid at the end of the day. Massive shame. But let's move on, because we have two trailers to talk about, both weirdly children's films, I guess, and animated. I wanted to talk about these two films because they're both in very odd and bizarre situations for the most part. And the first I'm going to talk about is the new Tom and Jerry film, which is coming out next year. This one is both live action and animated, and it's very confusing, this film, because originally Warner Brothers had stated that they're going to push this Tom and Jerry film back, to which I was like, okay, they're doing something pretty amazing. But yet they let the Scoob movie, which isn't very good, be released on video on demand, and that film basically got forgotten about and destroyed. But yet you see this Tom and Jerry trailer, and it's nothing special, honestly. It is the most kids film well, the most kids film trailer I've seen in a long time. There is nothing here for anyone over the age of 9 in this trailer. And that's not a bad thing, obviously. If you want to make a good film for kids, fine, do it. I have no problem with that. I'm not saying every film has to cater to every single age range and audience. It does not. But you'd think that when you're trying to... You think that if you hold a film back for a wider release or a wider audience, it would have a little bit more of something. And I honestly don't think the star power in this film is obviously going to get parents to watch it, because there isn't really anyone, that noteworthy in the film. I can't tell you the name really of anyone in it. I recognize faces, but that's about it. And the premise itself is just very simple. It's just, girl who's working at the hotel, and she's got to prove herself by getting rid of the mouse in the hotel, being Jerry, and so you enlist the help of Tom, who's the cat. It's technically a simple premise for a Tom and Jerry, thing, but it's honestly nothing special. It's honestly really disappointing and underwhelming, almost everything about this trailer, and it's just confusing at the same time. Like, I'd imagine they maybe are going to explain it in the film, but is every animal in that world like cartoon? Like, does every animal just look like that? Because you see pigeons in the trailer and you see elephants. And I'm like, do they all just look like that? Do they look normal to the characters? Do they just look like that to us? It's a bit confusing because, there's a bit where Jerry gives her a letter and it's like, oh, it's, it's so well made. It's so well made. And I'm like, is that normal for animals to do? Because I'm thinking, in that sense, is Jerry nothing special? Do mice just all do that? You know what I mean? Or is Tom and Jerry just a weird case now? It's very confusing, and hopefully that is explained. But other than that, there isn't really anything that's honestly that interesting about the trailer itself. I think the animation is not very well done. They barely have shadows, which is strange, and also the lighting is just so inconsistent with them. Like, the characters themselves are always brightly lit for the most part, which looks incredibly distracting when you see almost like a glowing light version of Tom and Jerry in the dark. Like, there should be lighting on them. If they're in the world, real world lighting or lack of lighting should be affecting them. You see it slightly during the end of the trailer where they awfully reference Batman, but it really, really, really doesn't work here, and it looks very distracting. Like, they stick out way, way too much, to the point where they should have just made an animated film or made them, more realistic in CGI. It looks pretty bad, to be honest, and I'm just honestly just shocked that they went with this route. I don't know what Warner Bros. Is doing with its animated properties. The Scoob film was just not very good, and this does not look good at all. Which is a massive shame. It's just very generic, even for a children's film. I'm sure some children will like it, but it's just very generic. And it's just bizarre as well that watching this trailer, I got flashbacks to the Rocky and Bullwinkle film. And I don't know if anyone's ever watched that film, but it is a very, very bizarre film, because it kind of does the same things that this film does, where Rocky and Bullwinkle, who's a moose and a squirrel, they are still cartoons in the real world, so they kind of look like CJ, but they have a slightly smoothed over cartoon look, very much how Tom and Jerry looks in this film. And it does have the lead actress in this film, she looks exactly like the lead actress in the Rocky and Bullwinkle film, and I'm not sure if that's intentional, or I don't know if that's just a Hollywood trope that I'm not aware of, where it's oh, gotta get the sort of blonde-ish with that kind of hairstyle wearing a suit character to team up with the two cartoon characters. I don't know. Does anyone know what I mean by that? If you know what I'm talking about, let me know. You can email me at raccoonplusfriends@gmail.com. You can hit me up on my Twitter. That's Angry Raccoon, just one C in the raccoon. Because I don't know if I'm stumbling upon something new, or this is just something that's a cliche. But the trailer itself was just whatever, I'm not interested. I like Tom and Jerry. I think the classic cartoons were fantastic, but this is just not anything special. But let's move on to our final trailer, and that trailer is going to be for the meme returning, and that is the Boss Baby 2 Family Business. I'm somewhat surprised they're doing a sequel film, especially given how shit the first film was. The first film was not great, to be honest. A lot of people memed on it, understandably. They made fun of it, understandably. And when you actually watch the film and look at it, it's technically not a very good film. It's very messy. It's one of DreamWorks' poorest released animated and looking films in a long time. It's a very, very lazy looking film. And I'm not talking about like, oh, there being a lack of star power or it being unimaginative. There's just straight up stuff that doesn't make sense in that film, like scaling proportions and the animation designs, and there's animation errors in it. It's really not well made. And I hope that this film is a little bit better, soon as I'm guessing they're going to have a big of a budget. But I will give this trailer 1 point for being just a little bit more different with the sequel. And that's it seems the sequel is going to start out with the two main characters or brothers from the first film all grown up as adults. And I like the idea of these two characters kind of still not being like friends or seeing eye to eye even after all those years, despite the fact they both have gone their separate ways. For a kids' film, that's pretty interesting. To kind of tackle the whole idea of siblings growing apart, one being, like this successful business person and one being just, your average person with his wife and kids, That's a pretty interesting idea for a kids' film. It's a shame they're not going to do anything about that because they just decide, they're going to become children again. Which I think is kind of a missed opportunity. I think it'd be more interesting if only one of them was a smaller child. Like, for example, if the boss baby became a baby again and the kid stays an adult, and obviously him as adult is like, no, I'm in charge, and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, no, but I know what I'm doing. That was a missed opportunity in my opinion, because the rest of the film just looks lame as hell. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because I wanted to kind of praise the film on that aspect, because I think that is an interesting thing to do. I can't think of too many sequels or animated children's films that, kind of focus on adolescence in that sense and kind of talk about that whole aspect of, growing up and, sibling rivalry. That's pretty interesting, but it's a shame nothing's going to come of it, unfortunately. But, yeah, I'll mention it because I know people like to make fun of it because it is a, pretty terrible franchise, I guess. I mean, it's got a Netflix series after all, and that is worse than the film. But, yeah, that's pretty much going to be the podcast. It's been a bit of a odd one in terms of just BS happening in, the world of bigger companies screwing over other people, and then you've got some weirdly mediocre films to look forward to next year. But that's kind of the status quo, unfortunately, when it comes to films. Films is pretty much liquefied, mainly in terms of the mainstream films released. If you want to talk about independent films, there's been some good ones. But I guess I'll end this podcast with the video of the episode as usual. And as we are talking about November, and it is the end of November, and typically, I know a lot of people like to label, November so many things like Movember, No Nut November, and all these other kinds of things. November has always been November Remember or Remember November. And I'm going to remember something. And that is going to be the video of the episode, which is Gorillaz with Tomorrow Comes Today. Now, this is a very interesting music video because this music video, as of the 27th of November, is now over 20 years old. This song, and I guess technically the music video. And this is a very interesting music video. It is, of the original music videos released for Gorillaz' self-titled first album, this is the one that kind of, I think people forget about the most, and it pales in comparison to the other music videos, because it has the least amount of animation in it, but in my opinion, it kind of fits the song very well still, especially given what I'm going to say about it and what you'll see in it, because obviously you have the music videos for like Clint Eastwood, everyone's seen that with the Gorillaz in the Graveyard. You have 19-2000, which obviously has them in the dune buggy, and then you have Rock the House, which is like that really crazy like sports themed one. This music video has very little animation, and it kind of just has like very limited animation, but it has like images from London during the late 90s and early 2000s, as well as, video of like, panning shots of like London and Soho with like the animated characters interspersed with it. And it's very interesting how they do that and how that kind of blends into this theme, or if you want to just go back to the idea of tomorrow comes today, kind of like, what's going to happen in the future. So it is interesting because this music video is aged so well, because you see that 2000s London, you see the graffiti during the time, you see the skyscrapers in the buildings, and you even see like a few Bansky images or artworks before he got super popular, which are in the music video, which might have been destroyed by now. So it's a really interesting time capsule, and it kind of fits into a weird kind of pseudo postmodernist kind of visual aesthetic for the most part, especially some of the shots that you just see of like buildings and that, and even towards the end of the music video you see this very interesting like shot of like it nighttime during London, just traveling super fast, and you see like the characters. It's a very interesting music video. If you've never seen it, highly watch it. Link in the description, the download link. It's one of my favorite songs from them, and yeah, I thought it would be definitely very prevalent. I think it fits remembering in November pretty well, like actually perfectly, honestly. And yeah, I think that's going to be it. Second to last normal podcast before we do the end of the year podcast. We are going to do it. It may go up later than planned. It may go up earlier than planned, but we are going to do it, and we should have a few people on it, because I think different households can mix in terms of like these weird lockdown situations. The British or the English government has no idea what the hell they're doing, so they constantly keep flip-flopping, and news outlets and people are just trying to keep people like confused and terrified and all that rubbish, but I'm trying not to buy into that. I'm trying to keep myself, my friends and my family safe at the end of the day, so we will see what happens. But I guess on that note, I'll end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.